Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about Cocos, and we have the co-founder in the hot seat right now. His name is Richard. Richard, thank you very much for being on the channel today to talk about Cocos.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Cocos, or better known as BCX, it is something all about gaming. It's certainly leading the way as a full stack solution, but what does that actually mean? We have Richard here to explain every aspect, all facets of it, so that we leave no stone left unturned. Now, Richard, obviously it's stated, as I mentioned, as a full stack platform for decentralized gaming and digital assets. Can we just talk about the term full stack first? What does it actually mean to be a full stack of anything in blockchain?
Yeah, we're trying to provide a whole solution from a blockchain system up to this game engine that has a multi-blockchain compatibility, all the way up to this IDE where the developers can actually use. So by providing these three major components, we're trying to build the developers the whole system that they can use to build games on decentralized infrastructures.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, obviously there's key components, and we will break those down, as you mentioned, the IDE, and that will need some further explanation. But let's now talk about the problem inherent in gaming right now in relation to blockchain. Now, many people, the buzzword right now is saying that it's the perfect use case, that blockchain's perfectly situated for gaming. But what precipitated this? Why is there a need for specifically this full stack solution, even in this decentralized frame of blockchain?
Well, I think if I may, I want to just share some of our opinion why blockchain games make sense. Because we can see a lot of economic sides in the games. Every game there is an economic insight. So we believe there is possible some alternation of the game business model from the old days where we pay for service, that we pay, example, like money or our time or our behavioral data for exchange of those digital experiences. But also there is, we also notice there are some popular games, people actually trade in-game items or valuables. So might there be any possibility that some of the digital experiences can be treated as assets? So after this emerging technology of blockchain, we actually found there might be a certain opportunity in it. So that's why we are assuming, or we're proposing that the blockchain games might be viable. So that's why we started this project.
Right. Well, let's talk about, you say start, but there's actually a start that was earlier that preceded the actual blockchain technology in relation to Cocos. Can you talk us through exactly what that was with regard to the pre-existent technology that you had, the 2DX Cocos technology, and how important that's been to have as a pre-existent platform to really provide for some credibility, some technological underpinning?
Yeah, so the founding team is major members of the founding team were from this project called Cocos-BCX, which was one of the biggest game engines in the world. So we had 1.2 million registered developers, and we estimated about like 3 million developers ever used Cocos engine. So in the old days, what we did is that we provide this software framework, or we call it a middleware, to help developers deploy their applications on different devices and different platforms. So we want to borrow that idea into the blockchain system as well, meaning that if any developer want to make decentralized games or applications, they can use friendly languages and quickly deploy those onto different blockchains. Okay, so that's the idea.
Right. Now you talk about, you want to see that the migration from the user base that you have, the 1.2 million that you mentioned, is that correct? It was that number?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so you're saying that there is this significant user base, and that is a very large one. But the question is, moving from 2D, obviously there's for a period of time now, 3D has become a buzz word in terms of gaming and the interests that are related to the kinds of games that evolve. Are you concerned at all about the criticism, perhaps, that this is not going to cut it, that the 2DX technology is just not going to be robust and not going to be as advanced enough as it transitions into blockchain?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, actually, Cocos or some of the peer softwares In the old days, we focused on graphics, audio, or like interaction. But in the blockchain industry, I think we're all starting from scratch, basically providing engine for the game economics. So I think what we inherited from Cocos 2DX was actually not the graphics or the technology itself. It's about our understanding to the development of the industry and the development of the demand from the developers. So we're going to leverage on that.
Sure, and that sounds like you're well and truly working at the technology, which we'll unpack. But how can you ensure the transition of the users as well? Obviously, we discussed that you're going to create some sort of new technology and really build out that in terms of developing community, I would assume. But how can you ensure that you'll maintain the momentum of these current users in that interim phase? What are you doing? What's the strategy to keep this interest alive?
Well, I think the only answer is to provide an industrial-grade, viable product for the developers. Because game developers are very down to earth. They don't really buy in concepts or any other ideas. So I think the plan is for us to actually provide a game engine that can help them to fastly and easily develop things on blockchains, as we did for different devices 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm afraid that's the only answer. Yeah.
Well, it's a good start to the answer. Let's talk about though this engine you talk of. Let's break it down into the features. Let's talk about its capacity. What exactly is the real asset of this technological shift into the engine itself of Cocos?
Well, if we consider engine as this one of the components rather than the whole system, I think the value of the engine is about multi-system compatibility that enables developers to quickly deploy their applications to different systems according to their design of the economics. For example, some of the games may fit for POW-based blockchains. So by programming through our engine, they can easily deploy their applications on Ethereum or other POW chains. Some of the programs, they may fit for DPoS chains for better performance or better like processing capability. So they may go through us to deploy on DPoS or both. So that's we are providing the economic efficiency for the developers instead of just convenience.
Right. Now, in that respect, are you also the suite of tools? Say, for example, I'm someone who wants to create a dApp. I'm a game developer. I want to utilize the Cocos platform as a full stack solution. Are you going to offer me tools in that respect?
Yes.
Can you talk us through what those tools would be?
I think the most fundamental tool, or like the essential tool, is the IDE, which is the working environment for the developers.
Okay,
so
why is that so important though, Richard?
It's sort of like, if we think about today, some of the blockchain games, they're in the relative like early stage. They make their own graphics and they incorporate some blockchain mechanisms. But if we compare that to the digital gaming today, which is a totally mass production industrial grade, you actually need a very efficient tool to incorporate different things. For example, your ad network, your payment, or your blockchain economics. So that's completely different games. So that's why we're trying to, we aim to help the industry improve to certain industrial level, to certain industrial level. That's the plan.
Right. Now let's talk about enterprise, because with industry comes the need for enterprise. What are you currently doing to move in that direction in terms of sustainability with a robust revenue mechanism and model?
Well, I think the core idea is to try to borrow the good things from the real world, or something is actually already exists. If I may, I want to cite the example of Magic the Gathering. Mm-hmm. It's actually a very perfect type of game that can be, number one, it's a strategic game, it's a number game. So it's sort of like the whole planning aspect of the game can be further amplified, or like can be further improved by blockchain. Another thing is it's a natural collectibles included in the game. So as we can see from Amazon or any other like eBay, some of the valuable cards can be sold at $30,000 US. So those mechanisms can actually be leveraged by the blockchain mechanism.
Right. Let's talk about how, because it's quite fascinating when you go into the token design with regard to fungibility and non-fungibility. Can you talk us through the importance of these non-fungible token opportunities with regard to, particularly Ethereum initially, and what they are for with regard to digital assets?
Well, I think the nature of digital assets or non-fungible is how we see the digital experience as valuables. So right now, our solution is includes two parts. One part is actually well noticed by the industry peers. For example, there are a lot of peer projects that we really like. They talk about the definition of the non-fungible token themselves, their formats, how they're transferred, how they're recorded. But there is another key factor from an economic point of view, which is the scarcity of supply.
Right.
So by proposing a lot of solutions to help the core scarcity algorithm or core game algorithm on chain, we are actually trying to integrate the whole part, or we're trying to make this asset idea or the asset concept as a whole by providing the scarcity as well as the recording and transferability.
Sure.
So that's,
sorry to interrupt, but in context, can we just use an example of a game so that perhaps the audience can better understand? You're talking about scarcity. You're also talking about the digital asset being something that people can control the value of, essentially, and have that autonomy to decide. That discernment is from them. So can you give us an analogy using a game that you perhaps know of what it actually translates to?
Well, for example, if there is a game like Final Fantasy, there are a lot of mini-series, and even among the series, there are certain connections. So if there is any in-game item, for example, bottled water, is valued in one of the mini-series, actually the users can naturally build this value connection among different games. And then they can trade their assets and use them. So that's an example. Another example would be like, for example, Magic the Gathering. Definitely, some of the cards can be traded in some sub series or sub games if we try to use that analogy.
Right. Okay, so it's obviously a really important mechanism for trade. It gives people the authority. It's essentially like having a decentralized system in which people can really decide for themselves exactly what the value is for the creative content. Now, in that respect, is the potential for Cocos to move beyond gaming at any given point, given that you've mentioned digital assets as a focus, and given the scope of that term, is it possible you can move on beyond gaming at some point in the future?
Very likely, and we believe that's because pretty much like all the digital experiences share similar properties. But in the midterm and short term, we're just focusing on gaming because gaming is a 130 billion market per annum. So that's good enough for us to start.
Right, and you're starting where? The gaming sort of epicenters of the world seem to be Korea, Japan, and China. Is that what your focus area, the Asian belt?
It doesn't have to be Asian, but right now we have an invitation-only testing. So we have multiple institutional developers testing our AlphaNets. So we expect them to be seen in the next few quarters. So that's what we have now.
Okay.
But we're definitely trying to broaden our developer base, basically by recalling all those like registered developers and see if they're interested.
Well, can we talk about that now? With the Cocos 2DX that we were talking about, the registration process is well known. Almost every developer, related to gaming would know of that. Can you talk to us about the scale globally of Cocos 2DX, and also the likelihood, once again, of registration and the connections that you'll be able to utilize or capitalize on simply because of the name that you carry?
Yeah. So again, we have 1.2 million registered developers. About half of them are from Asia. Another half are from like North America or Europe. So the way they work together was like Cocos-BCX was a total open source software. So people don't have to pay any money, like developers don't have to pay unless they want to use some premium functions. So a lot of the top game developers, for example, like Zynga used to highly leverage on Cocos. And even today, the top games, like 30%, 40% of the top games on Apple growth lists, they are made by Cocos. So our team has been working with the top game developers and publishers all around the world. So I wouldn't say that we can push them to move to blockchain, but it's true that we understand what they care about and what they need to get into blockchain industry.
Okay. Well, you say we shouldn't have to push, but what strategies are you employing as the co-founder of this team and this full stack solution to engage? What are you doing to engage with these centralized entities to foster the potential of partnership?
Oh, I think the strategy right now is we start from a minimum viable like system. For example, we start with the simple games that is naturally adaptive to blockchain mechanism. We start with, for example, simulation games, business like operating games or collectible games. And later on, when the users and developers see the economic value of this, there will be more institutional developers come in. There is an example actually in the beginning of this year when we just started for like 3-4 months. Developers here in China were very skeptical about a blockchain game. But later on, after 2 to 3 months, a few games came out, including like CryptoKitties or Decentralized. We can actually see the interested developers like became like tenfold. That's as long as they see the value of the industry, they just come in immediately.
Right. Well, if we can pull it back to the tech though, I mean, you've also got some key components you've built in. One of them is the Graphene framework itself. Can you tell us a bit about that? What's the importance of that framework?
The graphic?
I think it's referred to as the Graphene framework, designed for customization, and there's references also to its high performance.
Yeah, Graphene.
Yes. Graphene, my apologies.
Sorry, no, it's about, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So Graphene framework was derived from the BitShare. It's also part of the fundamentals of EOS. So basically it's a dPoS framework. The reason why we are redesigning the dPoS and use it as the first version of our own blockchain is because we want to balance the performance and consensus mechanism. So although we reckon this POW is more prudent in terms of consensus, security, but still, for a high caliber or high performance applications, we need to get the developers going. So we're not, I can't say that we're sticking up to dPoS in the long run, but right now the whole idea, like everything is centered around the idea of getting the developers started.
Right. And so essentially you're trying to solve that trilemma issue in a much more logical sense, given that one of the key problems with the POW is essentially the scalability factor. You're trying to resolve that by moving to dPoS. What about other features with regard to your wallet? Let's talk about that. If we could also, what's happening with the wallets associated with Cocos?
So our wallet is more like a use case oriented wallet. It can be seen as a, for example, mostly for non-fungible token front games. It's also a user interface rather than just a wallet to different entertainment applications. So right now we are about 75% complete the wallet. So I can't wait to show that to all of you guys.
So when will we likely see that unfold, Richard? Is that likely to happen this year?
The plan is we're also releasing the wallet, the beta version of the wallet by the end of this year in the Q4.
Okay, well, since we're talking about time and aspects that are likely to roll out, how is the roadmap going? What's happening in the near future with regard to key developments in the Cocos ecosystem?
Yeah, so some of the milestones, other than like we launched last November, and then we released our first demo of the blockchain and the token generation and transfer in March. And 2 months ago on this event called China Joy, we showed our alpha internal test. Basically, it's 2 games and the whole system. So the plan was to release the beta version for public testing in Q4, late Q4, and make a commercial launch by Q1 or Q2 next year. Right now, we're a little bit ahead of schedule.
Okay, so that's a good sign that you're ahead of schedule. It means that you've managed to have a team in which can achieve this with you. Let's talk about that for a moment. How is the team going? What's the team number? And what's the plan for the future with regard to team building?
Yeah, so right now we roughly have 50 people. It's a relatively big team because gaming is always a mature industry. So we also have some business team members on board. In terms of blockchain research and development, we have like 30 people, and the other 20 are focused on marketing, business. So I think some of the main person in our team is like my partner Haozhi Chen. He's a serial entrepreneur in China, pretty well known, especially in gaming. He was the founder and also sponsored the global community of Cocos, and also our chief tech, who incorporates like game development experience and blockchain experience. That's kind of a rare in China. I would assume also globally.
Right. And so I'm sorry we cut out for a moment there. So you're really bringing some rare assets into your team that are really gaming focused and not so general.
Yes, and the key is industrial level. That's what we always like highlight.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about your connections with enterprise, with business? I mean, can you talk us through some real evidence of names even of businesses, the kind of things that these connections you're talking about, the highest level, can do? What do they offer for people to really understand in the lay space for the connection between real world business, even in China or beyond, and Cocos as a framework?
For example, some of the announced partnerships between us and some of the industry friends. There is a company called 5173 in China. It's the largest in-game item trading platform. So their annual turnover is about 1 billion US. So we're going to work with them to build this non-fungible token trading platform in China. We're also teaming up with the second place player. Another example would be, if I may say, for example, those corporates in IT industry, for example, Microsoft, Intel, because also Facebook, for example, Google, Cocos has regular business with them, basically optimizing the software engine and working closely to support their game-related activities. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that might answer the question.
I wonder that too, Richard. You know, it sounds like you're not telling us everything. The names you mentioned are really like significant. I'm not trying to FOMO. They just are. You mentioned Microsoft, you mentioned Facebook. These kinds of businesses are all, you know, they all have a common interest in gaming. No question. Many of them are also focused on blockchain for the future. So let's talk about that with regard to the potential of the tech to cope with this as an ecosystem in terms of scalability. Now, what are you doing to achieve the goal of 100,000 TPS? And do you even need to go that big, considering currently you already can do quite a substantial one?
Yeah, I think the solution we propose in our white paper is just for stage one. Number one, we actually didn't invent any blockchain. We are standing on the foundation of Graphene framework.
Yeah.
Number two, we kind of did a deep redesign of that to make it more adaptive or more fit for gaming. For example, we support syntax level markup for seniorities, for priorities of smart contracts. I don't want to go really deep into the tech, and I'm not the best person to explain it. But by doing that thing, we are actually trying to build something that the application can interact with the users. At the same time, some of the key things are also put onto the blockchain to reach the consensus and get the signal back. So also, for example, compartmentalization, that's how we try to distribute the load of the whole system. So that's only for stage one. And we're open to third-party solutions and partnership. We are actually working with a lot of sidechain or channel solution providers, as long as they can help developers to quickly deploy something. And,
I see. So are you currently discussing that with any current projects? Like, can you name any names that are providing solutions that could potentially resolve some of these or improve the scalability through side chains, through off-chain solutions, anything like that?
Well, if we talk about sidechain, actually we enjoyed discussing and working with the Loom, LOOM, which is a very reputable game project. And also, well, even today, we catch up with this project called Tenfold, which is also a channel solution provider. So they helped one of the D games, I think, increase their user base by 40 times or even more. Yeah, because that game used to run on Ethereum like mainnet, and right now they have a way more efficient way to operate.
Right. Well, so obviously you're not concerned, it's from what I'm gathering, about the current capabilities and capacity, given that, as I've read, you have a very fast block transaction speed. You know, it's approximately 3 seconds for the block generation. Is that right? Currently now?
Yes. Yes.
And currently it's over 3,000 TPS in operation.
3,500.
3,500. That's substantial, given that Ethereum is currently at 15.
Yeah, but again, we want to, based on Graphene, we are trying to also modify some of their systems. For example, we stress on the algorithm on chain, so we probably need to modify the block size and also the blocking time, as you said. So yeah.
But let's talk about now the potential for interoperability. Let's talk about ERC20s. Let's talk about NEP5. What's the plan in terms of your agnostic sort of full stack solution for gaming in connection with these wider, better known platforms that utilize blockchain as more of a generic application or facility rather?
Yeah, I think that can be explained from like two angles. Number one is our IDE and our engine. The idea of Cocos project is not to build our own blockchain system from top down or bottom up. So our IDE and software engine will support different blockchains. So we're going to build different data interfaces with different blockchains and interoperability. And in terms of...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just quickly, like in terms of the blockchain, the Cocos chain, since we're building on Graphene and it's a universal exchange from the very beginning, so we are going to stress on supporting the exchangeability of non-fungible tokens across different domains.
Right. Are you currently solely talking to Ethereum though, at the moment, and planning, obviously, as you said, talking to others? But right now, is it ERC20 is the focus?
We are looking at ERC20 and ERC, for example, 721, because those are very established standards, and they have a lot of awesome developers to support them. But actually, we also work with a lot of, for example, independent blockchain solution providers. Right now, our partners include Ontology, Neo, and Nebulous, and of course, we work with Loom. We're looking to expand that partnership.
Right, that's quite a few. I mean, some of those are very well respected blockchains in their own right and have a very far reach with regard to the networks. So no doubt that wouldn't that inherently affect also the popularity of your own project if you're onboarding and collaborating with those?
Well, I think that's the point of our project, which is helping developers to actually choose their blockchain, because eventually it is their demand or how they try to design their games according to different blockchain infrastructure properties. So I think by the time that we help them to quickly deploy onto those ecosystems, that's the time we succeed.
Mm-hmm. Well, clearly you've built in, and I won't go into the details, but how you're achieving some of the successes for your own, as we talked about, your own scalability. You've done partitioning. You've also built in multi-chain scaling and witness or delegation.
Delegation. Delegated. Yeah.
So witness delegation. So those things are obviously really important for achieving that. But if we move across now to the community itself, I want to try and understand better how you're going to engage these for the long term. What's going to be the real determiner to foster sustained use and application so that this can become real? You know, it sounds like you have all the ingredients. It sounds like you have literally built out all the requisites for this to work, and you've got the user base. But how do you finally make that transition into utility?
Well, I think the key again is to follow the reality, which is we're not creating some new paradigm for the game economy, but how we adapt and try to improve based on the existing economic principles and paradigm. For example, a lot of the topics and examples we have been discussing, they are real world samples or real world examples, instance. They already exist. We don't really need to reinvent them. It's just how we provide the tools to migrate them onto blockchain. And since we do believe this, the mechanism can actually help a lot of the experiences or digital subjects become assets. So we're not really worried about it. It's just it's what's the path, how we start, and what is our role in it.
Sure. Now, obviously, as a very unique full stack system, you are building in a token to allow that ecosystem to flourish. Can you tell us, why do you actually need to have that token though, Richard? What's the core fundamental benefit?
Yeah, thanks for asking, because well, since we have certain business and economic background, so we believe that for a new token actually represents a relatively independent economy. For example, gaming is an independent industry. There are principles or paradigms or rules running this kind of industry, which is different to the outside world, for example, other sectors. So when we face a subsector or when we face a domain like that, we do need some utility tokens or represent medium of representations to actually reflect those rules or paradigms. Mm-hmm. So that's the most fundamental idea of having our own token instead of just using Ethereum, which is also great.
Right. Well, obviously, you've really built that. Let's talk about that in relation to now the ICO itself. What is the plan? Because obviously, ICO is a contentious topic right now, given the bear market, given that we've seen a lot of pump and dump scams. What's the plan for the way in which you're going to raise token, your value? What token generation events are you planning on doing, and where are you currently at in your token fundraising roadmap?
Yes. So the basic idea is that a whole system will work like this. Number one, we don't want our developers to buy our token. Ideally, we don't want our developers to buy our token so to use Cocos, because we used to be open source software, free of use. Number two, we don't want users to buy our token, or so they have to buy our token to play the games, because it doesn't work like that. Even today, we got a freemium model, which you can play the game for free, and you can get the developers can get paid from other means. So the way we raise the resource, or we raise the fund, is kind of in accordance to those principles, which we raise funds from institutional investors. And we try to use that resource to bring some more benefits that we can give to the developers or users freely. So that's why we're not using an ICO, because this is not the same situation where some of our for example, industry peers, they want to gain traction to get their seed users or developers. Actually, we don't need to do that. As long as the product helps those developers, they're going to rush in and start developing games. As long as the game makes sense, if they're fun, users are going to come. Okay. So the users are not motivated by the airdrops, so we're not doing airdrops or ICO things.
Okay, but let's talk about, because everyone is going to ask you this anyway, what about the benefits? What about the bonuses for those who were early investors in the utility, the functionality, the plan for the future? You know, what's the carrot been for them? You know, can we talk about this transparently? What's it for those who've been able to, as strategic investors in the outset? You know, what's the carrot for them? Why would they do that?
Well, for example, some of the representative investors include Neo Global Capital. So, of course, other than investment, potential investment gain, they want to have a closer relationship with us. Some of them, for example, like 500 startups, they consider, or BlockBC, they consider blockchain gaming a very promising industry. So some of the investors, they are, for example, like Kingsoft Cloud. In the future, they might be our eco partner. We also think about using some collateral mechanism for those third-party partners. So they also have similar considerations. For example, they can get some token in the early days. So later on, if there is any collateral mechanism coming out, so they can be the holder or the witness if they want to participate into this ecosystem.
Okay, so obviously you're of the opinion that many of your early investors are there for the long term. They've clearly said that. Are you concerned at all, though, of any potential for dumping at all? Or if not, and let's discuss that in terms of liquidity, the potential for that to inject essentially tokens into the ecosystem.
Yeah, we are actually adopting a very bold lockup schedule, which is that most of the investors, they got 55% of their token holdings distributed and unlocked by the token generation day.
That's bold. That's very bold. Can you tell us why you did that?
Because we actually don't want the token price went up sharply, because when our users start to play games backed by Cocos token, we actually want them to have a stable coin price. Of course, that cannot be explained fully by like investors, like dumping activities or like purchasing activities. But we would rather to give certain supply of the tokens into the ecosystem so people can buy and use them, rather than we have a really big lockup, maybe just 1 to 3% liquid, and the price fluctuates a lot. That's actually not the issue. That's maybe that's what we want less, if compared to a big supply at the very beginning.
Right. Okay. So you've well and truly, you know, you're really thinking about how to ensure the viability or the future of this by having plenty of tokens accessible for interaction, for use in the ecosystem itself. Can you tell us, though, for that to work, you need to have good quality games built in. What are you doing right now to really build out that community, to support those who want to utilize your full stack?
Well, right now we have different products or features, as well as sponsorship programs. For example, product-wise, we're going to release our crowdfunding platform for the game developers. And also, we have investment or business relationship with some of the major application medium or application traffic interfaces. We're also going to build our own, for example, like game stores. So the first one, I would say, help them fundamentally to promote their games or to help them get the funding. Number two would be like, for example, introducing them to different blockchains, actually help those blockchain system to educate them, help them get familiar with the system. And also, we also provide some funding to the game developers to get started. But again, I mean, like game developers, their most valuable sunk cost is their time. Like they spend 2 to 3 months trying out blockchain games. That's the biggest risk they bear.
Right. Well, obviously, what you are saying, though, is that you have in-house strategies to really support the developers so that you can ensure that there'll be considerable numbers of games to come to the fore in the future. But how do you? What's the safeguard built in for quality? What are the quality controls to make sure that the reputation of Cocos is upheld?
Well, I think that's a very, very good question, actually, because 10 years ago, when Cocos was releasing their 2DX engine, what they did is they produced their own game and became one of the top hits in China and later on globally. So right now, that's the reason why we're having invitation only for the alpha test. Mm-hmm. Those developers that we have been known for years, they're really like top developers in China. So we are actually looking forward to their products, and hopefully it can be helpful to the whole community as well, to see some games with a really good user experience.
Yes, and it sounds like it's very interesting that you say that you've been very selective and it's invitation only, and you have clearly a lot of top-level connections. What about the global reach? Are you planning on building out global offices for Cocos? Is that in the pipeline right now?
Right now, we have team members in Beijing, Chengdu, both in China, and also San Francisco, Tokyo, and Seoul, Korea. We're also looking to expand into Europe for Southeast Asia.
Right, so you really are going global. It's been an absolute privilege speaking with you today. We've learned a lot about all the different components of Cocos. Richard, as the co-founder, is there anything you'd like to add, perhaps, for the community to really just, complete the discussion today of any aspect you want to raise?
Well, the thing is, I actually want to thank all the supporters and users of Cocos engine, because even for this round of founding, we got a lot of institutions who were ever developers based on Cocos, and they reached their first bucket of gold, and later on become really brilliant investors. They came in for the belief and appreciation of Cocos engine. We believe this is still the very early stage of the industry, so I would really appreciate any guidance, advice, or absolutely more than welcome if anyone can join us, so we can do this together. I'm really looking forward to this industry in the next 3 to 5 years. I can't wait to see how it looks like.
Well said, mate. And obviously the industry is looking good. It's shaping up to be one of the most important for real use case using blockchain, and even going beyond that. You are a full stack solution. You have an inbuilt engine. You are literally trying to reformulate how we look at gaming and using technology to support people, to enfranchise better opportunities, to allow for better incentives, to most importantly allow for the flourishing of digital assets and people to have autonomy to really dictate the value of those digital assets in gaming scenarios. So it will be interesting to see how you perform, how you evolve, how you build. But right now, all of the indicators are, given that you have pre-existent connections, you have substantial technology that is already well and truly known globally, you are really well situated, and I look forward to seeing you as you develop in this roadmap that is Cocos, the future of gaming, potentially utilizing decentralized technology.
Thank you so much, Brad.
You're very welcome.